For Vivian, the morning began, as always, quietly and steadily. There was complete silence in her house, broken only by the ticking of the antique clock in the kitchen. The woman's gaze swept over the familiar surrounding shelves with books, one of which was open on the coffee table, a blanket on the sofa that she had knitted 20 years ago, and an old armchair by the window where she liked to sit with a cup of tea. All this was a symbol of her quiet life. But the silence hid the loneliness that had been soaking into the walls for years. Her only companion during these long years was memories of the days when the house was noisy, when her younger brother David ran through these rooms, laughed, loudly read aloud his favorite comics. Vivian sighed. She was 65, and her life seemed complete. All the main decisions had already been made. Dreams had been shelved. She had the opportunity to leave, to start all over again, but it didn't seem real. She was startled when she heard a knock on the door. It was early for visits, and who could possibly come without warning? When she opened the door, she saw in front of her a man whom she would have recognized from 1,000.
David? Her voice trembled.
Her younger brother stood on the threshold, tall, stately, in a stylish coat, and with a bouquet of bright gerberas in his hands. He looked as if he had just left a business meeting. Neat hairstyle, good shoes, a beaming smile. But something in his eyes was different. Deep inside, Vivian noticed the tiredness he was trying to hide, as always.
"Hi, Viv." David smiled broadly and handed her the bouquet. "Guess who decided to please his older sister?"
What are you doing here? She stared at him, unable to believe that he was standing in front of her. You're supposed to be in Los Angeles. You had an important project.
"Come on, did you really think that I wouldn't find time for you?" He stepped inside, surveying the familiar surroundings. "It's just like when I was a kid. The same comfort, the same old books. Only you're a little more." He pretended to be considering the word ... sophisticated.
Sophisticated? I'd rather say old, she snorted, taking the bouquet from him.
After putting the flowers in the vase, she couldn't help but smile.
Sit down. I'll make tea.
"With pleasure. But promise not to forget that I love it with milk."
Yes, I remember, Mr. Picky.
David laughed. He sat down in her old armchair, crossed his legs and looked around the living room. Everything here was painfully familiar to him, as if he had returned to the house where his best years had passed. Although it had been more than 10 years since he had left here, he suddenly felt that he had not left anywhere. When Vivian returned with 2 cups of tea, she saw her brother looking thoughtfully at her favorite Langston Hughes volume. He picked it up and flipped through the pages.
"Are you still reading it?"
Of course, she replied, sitting down opposite him. Hughes's poems remind me of the times when I believed I could change the world.
"You also cheated, Viv. If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be who I am now."
She lowered her eyes, trying to hide her emotions. Those words from David meant more to her than he could have imagined. She had always assumed that her sacrifices for him were self-evident, that he hadn't even noticed them.
You've always been strong, David. You could have done it without me?
"That's not true, and you know it. You were my rock. You've always protected me, even when the whole world was against us."
She remembered the times when she had to work 3 jobs to feed them both. How she gave up all pleasure so that he could go to college. How she was always there when he fell. She was proud of what he had become, but there was always a shadow of regret inside that she had missed her own life.
So how is your life in Los Angeles?
"Work, work, and work again," he replied, leaning back in his chair. "Sometimes it seems that I no longer live, but just exist."
You've always liked to be busy. This is your element.
"Maybe. But sometimes you want to get back to what's really important." He paused, as if gathering his courage. "You know, Viv, I've been wanting to tell you for a long time."
She looked at him with interest. His gaze became softer, almost childish.
You are more than a sister to me. You are my beacon, my family, my support. I know I'll never be able to give you back everything you've done for me, but I want to try.
She didn't know what to say. Something ached in her chest, as if she'd heard something she hadn't dared to wait for.
You don't owe me anything, David. I did everything I could because I loved you.
"I know. But now it's my turn to take care of you."
Vivian felt her eyes fill with tears, but she quickly turned away so that he wouldn't notice.
Then start by staying for lunch.
"Whatever you say, Captain. Just promise not to add too much cinnamon."
They both laughed, and in that laugh was everything their past, their present, and what was yet to come. The days flowed like raindrops on a window pane, slowly but inexorably, with a soft sound, as if fate decided to mockingly remind that life continues to move forward. After David's sudden return, his presence became permanent. At first he stayed only for dinner, then stayed for another day, and soon turned Vivian's guest room into his temporary residence. He explained this by saying that he wanted to take a break from the hustle and bustle of the city and gain strength. But Vivian noticed that there was something deeper behind his smile. Her younger brother, who had always been so confident, now looked vulnerable. David, in turn, gradually got into the rhythm of her life. He saw her wake up early in the morning to water the plants on the porch, or sit down with a cup of coffee and a book in an armchair by the window. He noticed how carefully she put the groceries on the shelves, how carefully she chose her words when talking to the neighbors. Vivian was precise in her actions, but there was an inner tiredness in her movements that she never showed. One evening, a few days after his arrival, they were sitting on the veranda. A light wind was blowing outside, making the leaves whisper something of their own. There were cups of tea and a plate of biscuits on the table in front of them. David watched the sunset, and Vivian, habitually preoccupied with her own thoughts, was silent.
Have you ever regretted staying here? His voice was low, as if he wasn't sure if he should ask the question.
Do I regret it? Do you mean this house or my whole life?
Probably both.
Vivian was silent for a moment, considering his words. She knew what to say, but she wanted to be honest.
Sometimes. When you were little, it seemed to me that I had a purpose. I knew that I was doing this for you, that you would become someone great, that you would live up to my hopes, and you did it. She looked at him and smiled a little. But now that you're an adult, sometimes it feels like I've lost myself.
David felt something pinch in his chest. These words were both truth and pain that he hadn't expected to hear.
Viv, you know you've given me everything I have. If it wasn't for you.
You could have done it. You've always been smart and stubborn. I was just helping, guiding.
You have done more than you directed. You sacrificed everything so that I could become who I am. But you never thought about yourself.
David, I was thinking about myself. It's just that my wishes turned out to be not so important.
Her gaze returned to the street, where the evening sky was gradually darkening. She knew she couldn't bring back the years when she could live for herself. But deep down, she didn't want her sacrifices to go to waste.
And now that you have time, what do you want to do?
I want peace, David. Just peace.
He felt a strange sense of guilt. He knew that his sister deserved more than just a quiet life in a small house. Her sacrifices allowed him to succeed, but at what cost? The next day, David decided to distract her from her routine. He suggested going for a walk around the city, visiting the old places they once loved. Vivian, though not immediately, agreed. They walked through streets that reminded Vivian of her youth. The old cafe on the corner, where she had once met with friends, was still standing in the same place. The small bookstore where she worked after school was still inviting customers. But it all seemed far away, as if it was from another person's life.
You used to love coming here. Do you remember how I got lost in this store once, and you almost killed the owner for not noticing how I slipped out?
Of course. You've always been so restless. He could have run anywhere if you hadn't been stopped.
They went into a cafe and ordered coffee. David stared intently at his sister, who was looking at the menu as if she had never seen it before.
Do you remember that you always took tea and cake here?
You remember well. But now I want to try something new.
These words made David think. Maybe there really wasn't enough new in her life. When they returned home, Vivian looked more relaxed than usual. The walk brought back memories in her, but also gave her the feeling that she still had time and opportunities for change. In the evening, sitting on the veranda, they talked again.
Have you ever thought about leaving here?
Sometimes. But where to? This house is all I have.
You have me, Vivi. You can always count on me.
Thank you, David. But you can't be my life. You have your own.
Maybe we could do something together? Start something new together?
Those words stung her. She didn't know what David meant, but deep down she wanted to believe that her life wasn't over yet. It's been a few weeks since David arrived at Vivian's house. Their life together was peaceful, almost like in the old days when they were younger, but something began to change in this quiet routine. They spent more and more time together, and their conversations became deeper, more frank, going beyond the usual fraternal sisterly communication. Vivian began to notice that David was looking at her differently. It was not like the usual look of a grateful younger brother, which he had been looking at her with for many years. It was a long, searching look, and sometimes it seemed confused, as if he didn't know what he was doing. Vivian ignored it, telling herself that it was all just a figment of her imagination. But one evening, everything changed. It was Friday. They were having dinner in the kitchen, discussing their memories of the past. David told the story of how, as a child, he accidentally ruined her favorite dress by staining it with paint, and how she screamed at him all day.
You were so angry then that I thought you'd never talk to me again.
Well, it was my only decent dress. We didn't have the money to buy a new one then.
And then I just wanted you to pay attention to me.
You've always been the center of my attention. Didn't you know that?
I understand that now. But then, I just wanted you to forget about all your worries for a minute and look at me.
Her heart fluttered. These words sounded too sincere, too deep, to be just part of a joking conversation. She felt something strange rising inside her, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. After dinner, David suggested going outside and getting some fresh air. They were sitting on the porch, watching the night sky.
Have you ever thought about how our lives would have turned out if everything had been different?
In a different way. What do you mean?
Well, if Mom hadn't died. If you hadn't taken responsibility for me, maybe you would have had a different life.
Everyone has their own destiny, David. I don't think it's worth regretting the past.
I'm not sorry. I just think sometimes, maybe we could be closer.
These words came out of the blue. Vivian frowned, but decided to ignore it.
We're already close, David. You are everything to me.
I know, but sometimes I feel like it's not enough.
The silence covered them like a blanket. Vivian felt that David wanted to say something else, but she was afraid to hear it. The next day, he suggested that they go for a walk to the lake, which they often visited as children. The road there was strewn with trees, which now shone with the gold of autumn leaves. They walked slowly, talking about small things. But the tension between them still remained. When they reached the lake, David stopped and looked at the water.
It's always been so beautiful here. This place reminds me of you.
Why about me?
Because you have always been a peaceful haven for me. Even when there was chaos around, I knew I could come to you.
She felt the warmth in his words, but that warmth was too personal.
David, I will always be by your side. You're my brother.
I know, but sometimes I feel it, that I want something more.
Her heart began to beat faster. She looked at him, but he avoided her gaze.
David, do you know what you're saying?
I know, and I'm ashamed of it, but I can't ignore how I feel.
The words hung in the air, heavy and uncomfortable. She looked away, trying to collect her thoughts.
David, we can't. This is wrong.
Why? Because that's what people say. Because society has decided what is possible and what is not.
No, because that's what I say. You're my brother. That will never change.
He paused, realizing that he had crossed the line. They stood by the lake for a few more minutes, but now there was a gap between them that neither of them could bridge. When they returned home, Vivian went to her room, trying not to show tears. She knew she had to talk to him, but she didn't know what to say. Her feelings were too complicated. This night was a turning point. They both knew that their relationship would never be the same again. After that evening at the lake, the atmosphere in Vivian's house changed. There was a tension between her and David that was almost palpable. Every look they gave, every word they said to each other, seemed to carry more meaning than they were willing to admit. Vivian tried to get back to her usual life, but nothing was familiar anymore. She understood that her feelings, which she had suppressed for so long, were now awakened and could not be ignored. For David, the situation was even more difficult. It seemed to him that he was standing on the edge of a precipice, knowing that a step forward could destroy everything that he and Vivian had built. But he didn't want to back down. His thoughts were focused on one thing: how to convince Vivian that what they were feeling didn't need to be hidden. Their closest friends and neighbors were the first to feel the changes. People who are used to Vivian's ordinary life have noticed that now she looks confused, thoughtful, and often avoids meetings. The rumors were not long in coming. Their walks together, long hours in the house with each other, the absence of the usual visits from neighbors, all this became an occasion for conversation. On the street, at the store, someone made a remark. "Did you hear that she sheltered her brother? And it's just the two of them all the time. It's kind of weird." These words gradually grew like weeds in the small community. People began to look at Vivian with suspicion. Even those who had always treated her with respect now tried to keep their distance. She noticed it: cold glances, evasive answers, whispers behind her back. It was a real challenge for David. He was not used to being judged, especially for something he considered sincere and real. He began to avoid communicating with his neighbors and going out to the store so as not to face their condemning silence. But one day this silent conflict turned into an open attack. One of the neighbors, Mr. Williams, stopped Vivian on the porch of her house. "You probably don't understand, but people started talking. Maybe you should be a little more careful." Vivian stared at him with a stony face, but inside she was seething. She knew what he meant. She knew what people were saying. But what was she supposed to do? David, who was standing nearby, heard this conversation and approached them. "If you have any questions, Mr. Williams, ask them directly to me." The man hesitated, muttered something about undesirable situations and left, leaving them alone. Vivian couldn't sleep after that incident. She felt the tension growing, as the society she had always trusted now looked at her as a stranger. But the most painful thing was that she couldn't decide what to do about it. David saw how it affected her. He became even more determined in his intention to protect their bond. It seemed unfair to him that people who didn't even know their real history allowed themselves to be judged. He started talking about moving out, to go far away from these people who will never understand, who will not be able to look deeper than superficial judgments. But Vivian didn't want to run. "If we leave, it will mean that they have won," she said one day. David was impressed by her words. He knew she was a strong woman, but even her strength had a limit. He saw her sitting at the window at night, staring at the dark sky, as if looking for answers there. Meanwhile, the rumors continued to spread. One of Vivian's old friends, Miss Grace, who had always been close to her, stopped coming in for tea. When Vivian met her at the store and tried to talk to her, Grace only nodded briefly and left, saying she was in a hurry. This betrayal of friends was the last straw for Vivian. She realized that their lives would never be the same again. They have become outcasts in a society that they once considered their home. But what to do next? Vivian was painfully searching for an answer. She felt that her life had split into two parts: the one that had been before, and the one that began after that evening at the lake. David, seeing her pain, decided that he could no longer stay in the shadows. He offered to talk openly with those who condemned them. It was a risky move, but he believed that only honesty could save them from complete isolation. They started with the closest ones. David and Vivian invited some old friends to dinner. It was awkward. There was silence at the table, which was sometimes interrupted by strained phrases about the weather and the news. But at some point David couldn't stand it. "I know what you're all thinking," he said. "You're judging us for something you don't understand." These words caused a shock. Some of the guests tried to get away from the topic, but David insisted. He told them that he and Vivian were closer than many siblings, that they always supported each other. Yes, we are different. Yes, our relationship is not like everyone else's. But does that make us bad? These words made some people think, but not all of them. Someone left without saying a word. It was a painful evening for Vivian, but she was grateful to David for his courage. She realized that he was willing to do anything to protect their bond, even if it meant losing everyone else. After that dinner, it became clear that their way forward would be difficult. But despite all the condemnation, they felt that honesty was the only way out. And although they knew that the world would not accept them, they decided not to hide. Vivian no longer wanted to live shy of her feelings, and David was ready to defend her to the end. After that night, when some of their friends turned away from them, Vivian realized that her life would never be the same again. She felt that she was at a crossroads, as if a huge invisible pointer was telling her two ways: one to a familiar, safe world where she could once again become just an older sister, and the other to the unknown, which scared her to shivers. But it was impossible to stay in place. The society that was once her mainstay has now become her judge. For years she had earned respect with her hard work and kindness, but now, after the rumors, people began to avoid her. Even the church she went to every Sunday was no longer a place where she felt safe. The pastor once mentioned sinful ways in his sermon, without naming names, but it was clear who he was talking about. Vivian sat in her usual pew, feeling like she was being watched. That day was the last time she crossed the threshold of the church. The house that had always been her refuge now seemed like a cage. Every rustle outside the window, every sound of footsteps made her uneasy. Sometimes she found herself closing the curtains so that no one could look inside. This paranoia became her constant companion, depriving her of sleep and rest. David, on the other hand, was determined. He saw Vivian in agony and felt he had to be the one to support her. However, his presence, while comforting, also intensified her inner conflict. Every time he entered the room, her heart was squeezed by conflicting emotions. He was everything to her: a brother, a friend, the only person who understood her like no one else. But these feelings, so warm and sincere, began to cross the line. Vivian often sat alone on the veranda, in silence, trying to make sense of what was happening. Her life has always been built around principles correct and clear. She sacrificed her dreams for the sake of her family, becoming David's mother and mentor. She never regretted her decisions, believing that she was doing everything right. But now she felt that her inner compass was broken. Her thoughts kept returning to their conversation by the lake. Then she tried to close herself off from David, from his feelings, from the very possibility that they could be more than brother and sister. But these words, spoken by him with such sincerity, continued to ring in her head, causing tears and confusion. The rumors continued to spread, and like a snowball, they became bigger and more absurd. People who didn't even know Vivian personally were discussing her. This was the last straw. She couldn't ignore the pressure anymore. Neighbors, acquaintances, even random people in the store began to avert their eyes or cast reproachful glances at her. Her world was falling apart, and she felt completely alone. David saw how she was suffering and suggested a solution to leave. He insisted that a new city where no one knows their history would give them a chance to start from scratch. But Vivian couldn't just give up everything she had known and built her whole life. This house was a part of her soul, and this city was the place where she was born and grew up. One night, when she couldn't sleep, Vivian sat by her bedroom window for a long time. She looked at the stars, which seemed to her as far away as her own happiness. Her mind wandered, returning to the moments when she first began to notice that her feelings for David went beyond the ordinary. It was so subtle, so gradual, that she didn't even realize what was happening. His smile, his kindness, his ability to understand her without words, all this became a source of comfort for her. But now that same consolation has become her biggest curse. She wondered what would happen if she gave in to her feelings. What price will she have to pay? Their relationship has already been the subject of discussion, but what happens if they admit their feelings to each other? Her life will be ruined completely, her name will be tarnished forever. She could lose not only the respect of others, but also herself. And yet there was a spark inside her that wouldn't let her rest. A spark of desire to finally live for yourself and not for others. She always did the right thing, always followed the rules. But these rules did not bring her happiness. Maybe it's time to break them? Over the next few days, Vivian tried to distract herself, but it was useless. She thought about David every minute. His laughter, his voice, his touch, it was all too real to ignore. She knew she had to make a choice, either step back and close this chapter of her life forever, or risk everything for the opportunity to be happy. One evening when David was sitting in the kitchen, she decided. She entered the room, feeling her heart pounding. She wanted to talk to him, to tell him everything that had accumulated in her soul. But when she saw his look, she realized that words were not needed. He already knew everything. It's been a few months since David left. For Vivian, this time was filled with emptiness and pain, which she tried to hide even from herself. Her house, which had always been a source of peace for her, now seemed empty and lifeless. His absence filled every corner with a silence that haunted her. She was trying to get her life back to its usual routine. Every morning began with the usual things: gardening, reading books, going to the store. But all this was just an attempt to distract myself. Her thoughts kept returning to David. She blamed herself for not being able to handle the situation, for allowing society and her own fears to destroy what was between them. The neighbors continued to shun her. Even simple meetings with local residents, which previously seemed harmless, have now turned into unpleasant clashes. She noticed whispers behind her back, evasive glances, and sometimes outright contempt. These moments made her wonder if she had done the right thing by pushing David away in order to meet the expectations of others. But the hardest part was coping with loneliness. Vivian was used to being a strong, independent woman, but now, without David by her side, she felt lost. Every day she found something that reminded her of him: a cup with his favorite drawing, his books that were left on the shelf, or a blanket that he once threw on a chair when he was reading by the window. Meanwhile, David was also restless. After leaving Vivian's house, he went to a nearby town where he rented a small apartment. But the work he was trying to immerse himself in did not help to drown out his feelings. Every day he remembered their last conversation, her look full of love and fear at the same time. He felt like he had betrayed her by leaving her alone. He couldn't accept the thought that their bond had been broken. Everything inside him screamed that he had to come back, that he had to be by her side no matter what. But he was afraid that she would push him away again, that her fears and doubts would be stronger. It took several months before he decided to return. For David, it wasn't just a decision, it was a step into the unknown. He knew he could face her rejection, her fears, but he couldn't take the separation anymore. When he arrived in his hometown, everything seemed the same as he remembered. The road to Vivian's house, the old trees, her beloved garden, everything looked unchanged. But emotions were raging inside him. He was afraid of how she would meet him. Vivian noticed him from the window. She was sitting in her chair when she saw him get out of the car. Her heart began to beat faster, and for a moment she froze, not knowing what to do. It was unexpected, but at the same time inevitable. She knew that this moment would come sooner or later. David went to the door and knocked. Vivian opened the door and their eyes met. At that moment, there was not just silence between them, it was the weight of their shared past, all those words that had not been said. His return was a moment of truth for Vivian. She realized that she could no longer hide her feelings, that she was tired of fighting with herself. She saw that he had not come to condemn or reproach her, but because he could not live without her. They talked for a long time. Vivian shared her fears, her pain, her guilt for what she feels. David, for his part, was as outspoken as ever. He said that their connection was the most important thing for him, that he was ready to fight for them, despite the condemnation of others. These conversations helped them both realize that they could no longer deny their feelings. Their bond was too deep to be ignored. But at the same time, they realized that their decision to be together would bring them even more difficulties. They decided to take their time. They understood that the world would not accept them, that they would face condemnation and rejection. But they also knew that they had each other, and that was the most important thing. For Vivian, it was like the beginning of a new chapter in her life. She felt that she no longer wanted to live by the rules that society dictated. She was tired of pretending that her feelings were wrong. She realized that being honest with herself is more important than the opinions of others. David, in turn, was willing to do anything to protect her and their relationship. He felt that their path would be difficult, but he was willing to go through it with her. This new chapter was full of suspense, but they both felt they had made the right choice. Their decision to be together, despite everything that was against them, was the beginning of their struggle for the right to be happy. Vivian and David made the decision to be together despite the severity of the condemnation and internal doubts, but their path to living together turned out to be more difficult than they could have imagined. The decision to openly admit their feelings required courage from them, which they had not even suspected before. Vivian, who had spent her entire life trying to follow rules and moral standards, suddenly found herself on the opposite side of public opinion. What used to be her pride, the respect of her neighbors, the status of a wise and kind woman, has now become a cause of pain for her. Her name was remembered in conversations with contempt. People who had once asked her for advice or help now avoided her house. The hardest part was accepting the fact that her choice had violated all the usual boundaries. Her inner voice kept reminding her that she was violating the unspoken law of family and society. But at the same time, a sense of liberation grew in her. Now she wasn't pretending, she wasn't hiding behind masks. She lived as she saw fit, and this feeling, despite all the difficulties, brought her a strange calm. For David, this struggle was difficult in its own way. He had always felt confident and independent, but now his confidence was being seriously tested. He could no longer ignore the scornful looks and open attacks. But the hardest thing for him was seeing how it affected Vivian. Her strength, which he respected so much, seemed to be eroding day after day. Their first attempt to go out together ended in failure. They went to the local park where they used to walk, not thinking about the fact that someone might be looking at them. But now their gazes were filled with condemnation. They felt like they had become outcasts in their own city. One of the neighbors approached them and bluntly stated that their behavior was a disgrace to the entire community. It was a blow that Vivian barely endured. They didn't talk much on the way home. The silence was loud and tense. David felt guilty for dragging Vivian into this situation, but at the same time he was firmly convinced that their feelings were worth all the difficulties. At home, they decided to develop a strategy to deal with the attacks. They started by limiting their public appearances. Their home became a refuge for them, a place where they could be themselves without fear and condemnation. They set strict boundaries, avoiding meetings with people who could hurt them. But this seclusion also had its consequences. Vivian, accustomed to being part of the community, began to feel increasingly isolated. Her memories of a time when she was respected and appreciated began to haunt her. She couldn't get rid of the thought that she had lost something important, and this loss depressed her. David, seeing her condition, offered to leave. It was a logical step for him to leave everything that hurts behind and start a new life where no one knows their history. But it was not an easy decision for Vivian. This city was her home, a part of her being. She couldn't just drop everything that was related to her past. However, thinking about it, she realized that this city no longer gives her the support she once received. Her past, though dear to her, now became a chain that prevented her from moving forward. She began to see David's offer not as an escape, but as a chance for a new life. Before making a final decision, Vivian decided to meet with a few old friends. She wanted to check if she still had connections that could support her, but this attempt only confirmed her fears. People who had previously admired her wisdom and strength could no longer hide their condemnation. Their cold words and evasive glances were the last confirmation for her that she no longer belonged here. After that, she agreed to David's proposal. They started planning the move. This process turned out to be difficult. They had to decide where to go, what to take with them, and how to start a new life. Vivian felt mixed emotions: fear of the unknown, sadness at parting from home, and the hope that their love would be able to withstand this test. They chose a small town where no one knew them. There they could start with a clean slate, without judgmental glances and rumors. The move became a symbol of a new beginning for them. Vivian knew that this step would change her life forever, but she was willing to take the risk. When they finally left their hometown, Vivian felt a strange sense of relief. She knew that she was moving away not only from condemnation, but also from a past that was no longer a part of her. Now her life was focused on what she considered the most important thing: her sincere feelings and honesty to herself. Their fight was far from over. Even in a new place, they had to overcome many obstacles, adapt to a new life, find a job, make friends. But the most important thing is to keep your love, despite all the difficulties. For Vivian, this move was a lesson. She realized that you can't live by adjusting to other people's expectations. Her choice to be with David was risky, but he gave her a freedom she had never felt before. Now, being away from the past, they could finally start building their future. And although their path was difficult, they knew that this was their path, and they were ready to walk it together. The move marked the beginning of a new chapter in their lives for Vivian and David. They left their hometown in the early morning, when the streets were still empty, as if trying to avoid a parting glance at places that were now associated with pain and condemnation. The car was loaded with their few belongings: several boxes of Vivian's books, David's clothes, a couple of family photos, and a few items that reminded them of the warmth of their home. Everything else was left behind, as was their past. The journey to the new city was long and exhausting, but at the same time it was permeated with a sense of hope. Every mile, every stop at a gas station or at a roadside cafe reminded them that they were finally leaving behind tenacious stares and condemnation. Now their world will be the way they create it. Their new home was in a quiet area on the outskirts of a small town. It was a small but cozy house with a white fence and a garden overgrown with flowers. It wasn't as spacious and well-maintained as Vivian's house, but there was something new about the place, almost refreshing. It was a house that they had to fill with meaning and warmth. From the first day, they began to equip their new space. Vivian took care of the garden, which immediately became her favorite place. She found solace in this activity, as if every rose or lavender bush she planted reminded her that life could be started from scratch. David, in turn, took over the job of repairing the house. He fixed creaking floors, repainted walls, and even built bookshelves for Vivian's books. Their joint work on the house became something of a ritual that brought them even closer together. However, not everything went smoothly. Despite the physical distance from the past, memories and fears did not let them go. Vivian often woke up at night, remembering the words of neighbors or the faces of people who turned away from her. She was afraid that their new life might face the same problems as the old one. Her anxiety increased when she noticed how David's gaze lingered on her, with the same feeling that had once made her doubt the correctness of their relationship. David, on the contrary, tried to be strong, not to show his feelings. He understood that their path would not be easy, but he believed that together they could overcome any difficulties. Every day he reminded himself that their bond was more than just love. This was their truth, which they could not deny. Gradually, they began to establish relations with their new neighbors. People in the city turned out to be less curious and more friendly. The neighbor across the street, an elderly woman named Mrs. Harper, often brought them pastries and invited them to tea. Vivian found comfort in her companionship, which she missed so much. Mrs. Harper seemed to see something in Vivian that others hadn't noticed: her strength and warmth. David soon found a job at an architectural firm. He had to start small, but he was glad to do what he loved again. His workaholism became a way for him to distract himself from negative thoughts, and he was happy to tell Vivian about his projects. She, in turn, began spending more time at the library, where she signed up as a volunteer. Her love of books and literature helped her feel useful. However, even in this new, seemingly safe life, their feelings remained under the scrutiny of others. Not everyone was ready to accept their closeness, which went beyond the standard understanding. Some neighbors asked questions about why they lived together and why their relationship seemed so unusual. These moments reminded them that public opinion is a shadow that cannot be completely erased. Vivian wondered more and more if they had done the right thing. She was tormented by doubts, but every time she looked at David, she felt a certainty that she could not explain. He became not only a support for her, but also a symbol of her strength. She saw in him everything worth fighting for. One evening they were sitting together on the porch of their new house, watching the sunset. The silence between them was not empty, but filled with meaning. It was the moment when Vivian realized that despite all the difficulties, they had made the right choice. They could not live for the sake of others, forgetting about themselves. Their happiness did not depend on the opinions of others, but was based on their own honesty and love. Over time, they began to feel more confident. Their home turned into a place where they could be free without fear of condemnation. Their garden blossomed, the walls of the house became warm and cozy, and the books on the shelves witnessed their new life. It was not just a physical transformation, but also a spiritual one. They no longer felt like runaways or outcasts. Now they were just people who had chosen their path. Their new life was far from ideal. They still faced condemnation, sometimes even in the most unexpected places. But they learned to be stronger. They learned to close the doors of their house from the eyes of others and open them to those who sincerely wanted to understand them. For Vivian, this path has become an important lesson. She realized that happiness cannot be found if you look back all the time or try to meet other people's expectations. Her life with David wasn't easy, but it was real. And that was the most important thing for her.